All right. So welcome everyone to the 5th open webinar organized by Századvég Economic Research Institute. This event follows our online discussions, which have started back in 2021. The previous webinars focused on digital skills and digital readiness of microenterprises, on how companies' behavior responds to existing climate policy goals, another one on deurbanization, and yet another one, the latest one, on the European Innovation Agenda. If you follow EU policy making, you notice that all these were and continue to be what they call the agenda setters. Today, we will discuss certain aspects of the new and ongoing recast of the EU Waste Framework, and not only from a sectoral policy, but also from a consumer point of view, consumer perspective. We find it also extremely timely to talk about consumer waste collection related behavior and how it relates or it could still influence the new EU Waste Framework. Our discussion, as always, is more targeted at bringing in results from primary research, experience and practice, and mainly from Central Europe. So today, during today's event, the panel will start off with an introduction from the organizers, and then it will be followed by the intervention from the person representing the European Commission in this respect. The department in DG Environment that is deeply engaged in the evaluation of the responses they received for the public consultation on the same matter over the last couple of months. Then our discussion will continue with hearing from the Hungarian government, the respective part of the Hungarian government. And then finally, we will hear MOL's view, the Hungarian company that was recently awarded the execution of the reorganized waste collection market in Hungary. We are planning to touch upon challenges, success stories, and shortcomings. My name is Pál Belényesi, and I will navigate the participants and panelists during our webinar today. Now, before introducing today's event more in detail, I would like to give the opportunity to Kökény from Századvég to briefly welcome the participants.
Thank you, Pál. Dear guests, I would like to welcome everyone to the webinar on the Waste Directive recast, which is brought to you by the Századvég. Századvég is a Hungarian think tank and consulting firm that carries out economic analysis and research for both private and public sector clients. We believe that sound advices are based on stable foundations. Therefore, our working methods are highly data-driven. We strongly rely on primary research, applying multiple qualitative and quantitative methodologies, including recent surveying technologies such as social listening or eye tracking analysis. In this webinar, we will cover topics related to the current review of the Waste Framework Directive. This could hardly be any more relevant as the global upheaval of the last 3 years has changed the landscape completely. We see 3 crucial disruptive developments. First of all, successive crises due to the pandemic and the war have somewhat reversed globalization, where the local availability of materials and shorter supply chains became key factors. Secondly, it turned out that the importance of waste management and the circular economy are not only sustainability issues, but can be a matter of the security of supply. And lastly, as fears of an EU-wide recession loom over us, we have to assess that not all costs that are deemed necessary are currently actually affordable. We have a lot to cover. Therefore, allow me to welcome our esteemed guests. Mr. Aurel Ciobanu-Dordea, Director of Circular Economy, DG Environment, European Commission. Ms. Silvia Szentesi, Senior Legal Expert of Circular Economy, Minister of Technology and Industry, Hungary. Ms. Anett Tóth, Senior Expert, EU Regulatory Affairs, MOL Group, Hungary. And my colleague, Mr. László Kökény, Senior Advisor, Climate and Energy Advisory at Századvég. Thank you for your participation, and I wish you all a great session. Thank you.
Thank you, Kinga. And as usual, I don't want to spend too much time on administrative aspects. So just a couple of words on the agenda. We have a panel discussion of 4 excellent speakers, and I am going to introduce the panelists very soon. We will then have a round of questions and open discussion with the audience. So if you have questions or ideas, think about them now. As for housekeeping, do write your questions in the chat box, starting with the indication of whom you're addressing with the query. We will collect them and pass them on to the intended panelists. The event is recorded. You might have heard it when you were already logged on, and will be made available on the Institutes of the Organizers website. All presentations will also be made accessible on the same website. Now, that brings us to a short introduction that I wanted to supply the audience with. So we know that the EU has had an overarching waste framework since at least 2008. If we look a bit further back for packaging and packaging waste, perhaps in the mid-90s, we can find something interesting for us. Now, the directive that we are concerned about is the 98/EC, which has been amended at least 4 times since, for the last time in 2018. This directive lays down basic waste management principles and requires, for example, that waste is managed without harming the environment and without risk to water, soil, air, plants, and animals. This piece of legislation also encouraged the concept of extended producer responsibility, the famous EPR, and tried to apply the polluter pays principle to its concepts. The directive, as we know, talks also about byproducts versus waste. And finally, among others, it established a waste hierarchy. The Commission, in its capacity as the monitoring agency for EU law implementation at member states level, published its last monitoring report of the WFD in 2018, according to which already back in 2018, more than half of the member states were at risk, as they put it, of not achieving their 2020 waste reduction targets. That is generally the 50% of municipal waste to be prepared for reuse. That has to be 55 by 2025, 60% by 2030. Among others, essentially all CEE, Central Eastern Europe member states appeared on the list: Bulgaria, Croatia, Hungary, Poland, Romania, Slovakia. So the region. This region was looking a bit better when it comes to targets concerning demolition or electrical waste and waste packaging. Now, we also know that municipal waste increased by the volumes over the last decade. And as we have seen, the EU waste legislation is driving considerable improvements, but the imperfect implementation leaves at the same time significant gaps in performance across the EU and in particular in the CEE region. The European Commission recently ran a public consultation on EU Waste Framework Directive with multiple aims: textile and food waste, circularity and sustainability of waste, and waste collection. There is, however, little focus on waste prevention and reuse of waste. Even the Commission noted on its website that consumption in general, that is the generation of waste, needs to be addressed. And what is consumption? At the end of the day, it is a directly and specifically measurable consumer behavior. Now, the consultation spawned a manifold discussion among experts and stakeholders, and this is how we come to our webinar. We would like to contribute to this discussion. We are aiming at providing information on how consumers approach waste generation and waste collection, what may be the hindrances that halt more effective, a quicker waste reduction at mass levels, and also how waste policies could be better designed. Now, That brings me to the introduction of the first panelist, Mr. László Kökény, who's a senior advisor, as Kinga said, at Századvég Group's Climate and Energy Unit. László is also a lecturer of tourism, innovation, and marketing at the Corvinus University in Budapest. He has overspanning academic activity, including 50+ publications, and he's a holder of multiple national scholarships. László, please introduce the research that we are going to discuss, at least in part, that was recently done by Századvég.
Thank you very much, Pál. Thank you for your introduction and kind introduction. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is László Kökény, and I'm a senior researcher at Climate and Energy Policy Advisory at Századvég. In addition, yes, I am a PhD candidate at Corvinus University of Budapest, and it is a great honor to present our research, which, based on the results of a large sample household survey, describes households' waste management attitudes, actual behavior, and perceptions of circumstances, and the drivers of their activities. In this presentation, I will present the results of our research carried out last year. I will start with a brief introduction and then turn to our key findings from different aspects. Finally, I will conclude with a summary of this approximately 10-minute presentation. Here you can see the research background. The research focused on households' activities related to waste, both with regards to their attitude and their actual behavior. The research provides great input to several fields of industry policymaking, both on the EU, European Union, and on the national level. Within the survey, Századvég Group assessed the general attitudes and opinions of Hungarian households regarding waste reuse, waste generation, and waste reduction. These data provide also good evidence for the revision process of the Waste Framework Directive, as you mentioned it before, and in its feedback and consultation period. It is important to note that the directive promotes waste prevention and reuse over waste recovery and disposal, especially on the household sector. For the research, we conducted a telephone questionnaire survey at the end of 2021. We interviewed 5,002 households with the statistically representative sampling method in Hungary. It is representative in terms of regional and demographic aspects. As I mentioned, we measured waste management attitudes and behaviors of households especially. Previous studies have shown that in developed countries, the development of households' soft skills, for example, their psychological and sociological characteristics, may be the key to their successful involvement in waste management. An inventory of possible explanatory variables has started to appear in the academic literature also in the recent years. Our research, however, tries to go beyond the existing literature's analysis, in that we not only measured households' willingness to participate or their attitudes based on theoretical assumptions, but also asked the respondents about their actual participatory behavior and their opinions on how they perceive the responsibility of waste generation and handling too. Here you can see our key and selected findings. First of all, the importance of the motivators. Among the motivating factors, the most important one, according to our respondents, is being knowledgeable and well informed in the topic. This goes beyond the dominance of institutional regulations or financial rewards. However, it should be added that in the real situation, financial considerations may also come to the fore. But these results show that the intention to manage waste is present among households. This is confirmed by in this another figure, because it shows that Hungarian households are committed to the issue, and more than 80% of them have a positive attitude towards waste management. The willingness to participate is also significant, with the 60% of respondents actually carrying out the activities listed. These activities are, for example, selective waste collection, composting, waste minimization, and conscious consumption and reduction of food waste. But there is a gap, and this gap between attitudes and actual behavior suggests or recommends that there is still work to be done on the decision maker side, as the positive attitude and willingness to participate somewhere and somehow diminishes before it becomes an actual behavior in the system. For this reason, we are analyzing this gap, because this gap may result from inadequate information or knowledge on the issue. It is also interesting to note that there is no direct correlation between a household's financial or social situation and its actual waste management behavior in our analysis. Actually, in Hungary, poorer regions have a higher proportion of people with actual waste reducing and recycling behavior than in the richer regions. An important factor influencing the development of the gap is that the products used are often of unsatisfactory quality, poor quality, and have a short lifetime. These conditions make it difficult to minimize consumption and subsequent waste generation, and also consumption is higher in the richer regions, so this could affect these phenomena. For this reason, we argue that although attitude is an important element in the issue, in the waste management and reuse issue, but it is more important to reduce the gap between attitude and actual behavior. However, it is no longer certain that this will be up to households because, as you can see, they are exposed to many external factors, as we indicated it in the green box. For this reason, we believe that it is a key to take these elements into account when drafting the new directive. For example, it should be noted that according to our research, more than 80% of respondents agree that the role of industry and global companies in waste generation cannot be ignored. Another important factor is the improvement of the country's rate of resource efficiency and the coverage of waste collection points. On the technological side, waste processing and its support must also be improved. And finally, product quality requirements should also be considered in the European Union, as in many cases, households are unable to buy products of good quality or that are more environmentally friendly. In addition, the regional exposure of some countries may also be an important factor in considering this issue, as Pál mentioned it in the introduction part. Overall, we believe that it is important to monitor household and population opinions and attitudes, but it is even more important to focus on the related actual behavior. Hungarian households have a good and positive attitude towards the issue, the waste management issue, but it is important to see that it is not only up to them to reduce waste generation. We can see that there is also work to be done at the member state level, for example, developing the knowledge and infrastructural part of the issue. And Hungary is aware of these, but it is important that EU legislation also encourages this. Developing the soft skills and motivators is important, but not enough. We think that significant focus should be put on ensuring the technological and infrastructural background and rethinking other circumstances households are exposed to. For example, the global distribution chain. So, for example, we should rethink our global distribution channels and so on. And it is very important to focus other motivators and also other external circumstances which can affect the household's motives and activities. So thank you very much. Thank you for your kind attention. And if you have any question, please don't hesitate to ask me. And thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you. Thank you, László. That was really within the time frame that we've set for you. Just a quick follow-up question. So did I understand correctly that that you found in your research that social status, financial means of household does not really affect waste collection and waste disposal, right? So yes. That's okay. So that is a bit of an oddity. Usually, people with shorter financial reach, they do not tend to care that much about how they collect waste and how they dispose waste. So that must be something very local. And also you mentioned that areas with a higher, I don't know, what was the ratio, the GDP per capita that you said as a benchmark?
NUTS to region.
Yeah, okay, so the NUTS regions. Okay, so
yes.
So richer regions generate more waste because of the fact that they consume more. That's
yes.
the
richer regions. Yes.
Okay, so that would be an interesting thing for the decision makers to consider when they come to the fact that what financial or cultural or other social incentives are distributed among the different regions, not only from a single top-down approach, but also taking the data on the field that institutions similar to you would collect. Okay, thank you very much, László.
Thank you very much.
The next speaker is from the European Commission, and I am delighted, obviously, to welcome Mr. Aurel Ciobanu-Dordea, who is, as Kinga said, the Director of Circular Economy and DG Environment. Aurel is a seasoned director, may I say that? It's not his first directorship or position in the Commission, and he has been previously in charge of the director responsible for enforcement, investment, and environmental governance in the same DG. And even before that, he was also already director of equality in charge of fight against discrimination in DG Justice, very difficult field indeed. He has joined the European Commission back in 2009 as a director for fundamental rights and EU citizenship in the same directorate that is DG Justice. Mr. Ciobanu-Dordea is a lawyer and holds an LLM degree from the University of Illinois and a PhD from the University of Bucharest. I would pass the floor on to Mr. Ciobanu-Dordea, and I would be really interested to hear about the experience that you've just recently had, amongst other things, obviously, with the public consultation concerning the WFD. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation to join this event. And I must say that I have appreciated a lot the initiative coming from member states from Central and Eastern Europe. It's not so frequent. We see a lot of older member states or economic operators or business associations from the, let's say, western part of the political continent of the European Union, and less involvement or less interest from the member states from Central and Eastern Europe. So I appreciate the interest, and also the fact that you try to play a catalytic role and to reflect on matters which are connected to the or relevant for the European agenda. This is very important for being able to shape the rules which the proposals which are brought forward by the Commission, but which are ultimately adopted by the European Parliament and by the Council, where all member states are represented. So I see this also, this debate that you are organizing as being relevant in the context indeed of the reflection that we are having, and you have rightly mentioned also the public consultation that we have recently organized around the possible revision of the Waste Framework Directive. Indeed, this is on our agenda. I would like to say also reflecting a little bit only on the very interesting qualitative research that was presented by Mr. Kökény on behalf of the foundation about the situation in Hungary and the incentives and the motivations and the drivers as well. I would like to say that, and I perceived somehow that the expectation was, at least from some quarters, that this will be a significant revision of the Waste Framework Directive. I would say, and this should be a reason for rather appreciation rather than criticism, that our plans are very targeted for the revision of the Waste Framework Directive. I believe that if we look retrospectively, we see that the ground was very fertile, and this directive was modified several times. You, Mr. Belényesi, have outlined the fact that last time it was modified in 2018. So one may speak even about a certain instability of the rules in this area. We believe that we need to let the dust a little bit settle, and the member states to advance with the implementation of the rules. But so we won't change, we won't aim to change the existing rules, nor the targets which have been revised in 2018. The purpose is to bring some limited changes. They will be nevertheless significant, but we will add something. And our attention has been captured based on the statistics and on the economic dynamics that we have seen unfolding across Europe, across the European Union. Our attention has been drawn by two developments: a growing level of food waste and lost potential, which the inadequate management of this food waste represents, and the growing amounts of textile waste, maybe also developed in connection with some patterns of production and consumption in the area of textiles, including from the public. And we believe that we need to do something about this as well. So without generating further regulatory instability, we would like to give some attention to food waste and to the proper management, a better management of textile waste. Around these topics, our attention concentrates. I think initially, some time ago, when the Commission has announced its plans about revising the Waste Framework Directive, somehow our statements have been more, we have spoken about a wider agenda. For instance, the matter of waste oils have been mentioned, has been mentioned. In the meanwhile, we have revised our own ideas because we believe also, and this is not, how to say, lip service, that we need to have stronger evidence which substantiates a regulatory intervention. And we haven't seen that strong evidence in relation to waste oils. We will need to watch this area for a longer period and see exactly what is going on there, but we believe that the ground is not ripe for regulatory intervention also in this respect. So I would also draw your attention to the fact that, I mean, because I have mentioned that our regulatory intervention in connection to the Waste Framework Directive will be limited. I'm saying this also because I believe that we need also on the Commission behalf, not only on the side of the Member States, to concentrate more on implementing better the existing rules. And we are discussing with the Member States currently about how this implementation is performing. I think you have mentioned, Mr. Belényesi, also the early warning reports that the Commission has published in 2018, the first early warning reports about the performance of our member states under a number of quantitative targets under the Waste Framework Directive, under the Landfilling Directive, and under the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive. And the performance in 2018 was not brilliant. We are currently discussing with the member states bilaterally about how the situation has changed. And while I will not make now, I will not enter now into details, I am saying that we will come up with the next generation, with the second generation of early warning reports, probably in the first quarter of next year, or maybe even second quarter of next year. Situation has not improved considerably, so more needs to be done in terms of implementation and enforcement of the existing obligations. And I would invite your participants, your guests, and also other interested stakeholders to look to these early warning reports that we will bring soon forward. I think also the plans related to the Waste Framework Directive need to be regarded in the wider context where the Commission has brought forward or intends to bring forward a number of legislative proposals, regulatory interventions, which are relevant for the attainment of the objectives and public policy goals of the Waste Framework Directive. And I have in mind, in particular, one proposal where we have looked at the durability angle. And I have appreciated that Mr. Kökény has highlighted also the interest of certain consumers to have more durable products. More durable products create less waste and makes things more manageable. At the end of March this year, the Commission has put on the table of the European Parliament and of the Council a proposal for a regulation on eco-design for sustainable products, where we have created a comprehensive product regulatory framework for making sure that wide category of goods, with the exception of medicines, food, and maybe there is one or two other categories of products, all the other goods currently on the European single market are potentially relevant for the this proposal for regulation. And over time, the Commission, or will see in what form and how, but will bring forward product-specific rules, aiming to make sure that a category of products or another become more sustainable and more durable. And if things go well, and if this legislative proposal will be adopted by the Parliament and by the Council, we have envisaged also the possibility to come up with a regulatory framework which is horizontal, that looks at a number of features which should be common for what means the durability, for instance, or what means reparability, or what means design for recycling, for several groups of products, not only for a single category of products. This is about legislation which is relevant and which has been brought forward by the Commission. It's still to be adopted by the co-legislator, so we are not having yet it in force, but the proposal has been made. I would like to draw your attention about another contextual element which is very important and relevant for the attainment of the policy objectives of the Waste Framework Directive. This is a legislative proposal that the Commission will table in a month's time, by the end of November in principle, if things go well. We will bring forward a legislative proposal for regulation on packaging and packaging waste, which should replace the existing directive. It is relevant because a number of elements about recycling, mandatory recycled content, design for recycling, secondary raw materials, yes, will be included insofar as they are relevant for packaging production and for packaging waste, will be included in this proposal with an aim to reduce. This will be the overarching objective of this proposal, to reduce the production of packaging waste across the European Union, which has grown stronger than the economic growth and stronger than the demographic growth of the population of our societies. And this is worrying. And I would like to draw your attention, maybe as a last element for reflection, to the fact that, however, the what could come under the scope of potential future modification of the Waste Framework Directive will be another strategic consideration related to the strategic autonomy of the European Union, looking at the situation of critical raw materials and looking at the pressure on global supply chains, which has impacted negatively our member states and the single market, and the fact that some third countries weaponize the access to critical raw materials on their territory, or their paramount role in producing different articles, different goods which include critical raw materials. We believe, and some of you may remember what the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has indicated in September when she came in front of the European Parliament to speak about the State of the Union. She referred to an incoming initiative from the Commission on Critical Raw Material Act, which among several strands will address the issue of recyclability and recycling and separate collection of goods which include critical raw materials. And maybe we will need to intervene also in the Waste Framework Directive. We try to do things in a coordinated way and to make a single intervention to address also this problem of the critical raw materials, together with food waste, the establishment of a food waste prevention target, and the introduction of provisions concerning extended producer responsibility schemes for textiles. So I stop here. The discussion, of course, is much more nuanced and much more complex, and there are also specific maybe aspects to be discussed. I look forward to the debate and also to the questions from the audience. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. I would have 5 questions already, but I won't ask all of them, but perhaps 2 questions. I see it on the Commission's work program for 2023 that the eco-design for sustainable products is amongst the priority pending proposals. So I would imagine that your expectation is very similar to mine, that this is going to be concluded during 2023. So it's not going to be shifted because of whatever you use the word paramount political powers. It is listed among there. However, I have not seen, maybe I've made a I misread it, the sustainable textile package that was presented, if I'm not mistaken, last summer, right? So you mentioned textile under the Waste Framework Directive and the extended producer responsibility for that. But how does that relate to, perhaps, if you could, share a couple of words?
I will.
The sustainable textile.
Yeah, I will try to clarify. So what you have seen in the work program for 2023, and in particular in the communication which has accompanied the work program, there, as it is customary, the Commission has also highlighted a number of legislative proposals which are already in front of the co-legislators and which the Commission considers as very important to be adopted before the end of the mandate of the before the next elections for the European Parliament. And the ESPR is among them. So it has been tabled by the Commission and it needs to be adopted by the co-legislators in order to take in force. Now, on textiles, what we have adopted so far was a political document, the textile strategy, which draws a number of bright lines, but does not regulate. And what we plan to do on textiles is to bring forward a limited range of regulatory interventions, out of which the introduction of provisions establishing extended producer responsibility schemes for textiles is only one. This intervention under the Waste Framework Directive should be seen in combination with the implementing act under the Eco-Design for Sustainable Product regulation concerning sustainable textiles. This act, in principle, should be adopted, we hope, with a bit of optimism. I have to flag this from the very beginning. We hope to see it adopted by the Commission before the end of 2024. And the third element which matters when you look at the regulatory interventions concerning textiles is an element which an intervention which tries to address maybe the microplastic released by textiles. And we are still pondering how we could intervene from a regulatory perspective. Should we do something under the regulation on textile labeling? Should we do something under the implementing act on sustainable textiles under ESPR? So
textile labeling is in the work program for 2023. The new proposals. So it is already mentioned that the Commission will probably come up with something on textile labeling. So that would bring all of them together. But again, it's not among the 116 priority pending proposals. So that's a lot of priorities. Hopefully there is no hierarchy among those over 100 priorities. And let me just ask a second question before we turn to the next presenter. So you mentioned that the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive is going to be revised, right? So the old one that's been in place is mid-90s, right? If I'm not mistaken. So I have just one question, because there is a significant, my information is that there's a significant difference between the implementation of this at member state level, right? So harmonized implementation is an idea, is a far reach to say. So what you come up with, is it going to be a regulation, more of a technical regulation?
A regulation. We aim to replace it with a regulation, essentially because we have seen also the divergences in implementation among member states. Of course, you have divergences in terms of performance. the recycling rates in certain member states is much lower than in other member states, but we have also seen, because we had and we still have a directive in force, we have seen regulatory intervention divergences between member states, and it's the economic operators who come to us also and complain that because obligations related to labeling or obligations related to recycled content or obligations related to forms of packaging, can be cardboard, can be glass, can be aluminium. There
lots
are
of administrative
yes,
problems.
yeah.
Just simply make it more difficult.
Significant economic consequences.
Absolutely.
So fragment the single market, and the same producer, and we had from Coca-Cola to producers which you don't know their name, because even if they are global actors, they are in general very distant from the consumer, and who produce packaging and who tell us, I cannot place any longer on the market of two neighboring member states the same packaging because of labeling divergences or because of other restrictions that have been introduced sometimes by both member states, and that are not only different, they are sometimes conflicting. And this is a problem. So we need to defragment the single market. And the only way to defragment the single market and to secure a good level playing field is to come with a regulation. But of course, it entails, I mean, some member states will not be very happy because it will restrict their margin of regulatory autonomy, and some will have to repeal their legislation adopted so far. So we need to come up with something which is both ambitious but also realistic and feasible. Because also the level of ambitions, for instance, when it comes to recyclability, recycled content, availability of technologies is different from
member states to member states.
Between West and East, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's what László was mentioning at the beginning, the regional differences, and one of the importance of Századvég's study is actually pointing out that cultural, social, financial, and regional differences are to be taken into account. So thank you very much. I have more questions, and I see questions popping up as well. So I'm sure we are going to turn back to you. So the next presenter is Ms. Silvia Szentesi, who is once again a senior legal expert from the Circular Economy Ministry for Circular Economy from the Ministry of Technology and Industry in Hungary. Ms. Szentesi has a throughout knowledge of the circular economy related laws and regulations. She has taken part in the preparations of the implementation of the 2018 adjustments of the WFD and has been involved in the process ever since. Ms. Szentesi, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy and very thankful to participate at this webinar, and really thank you for the opportunity. And I've got already so many useful informations. I make some notices already that I'm content right now. So thank you, colleagues. Good afternoon for everyone. Please, I would like to begin with the first slide. Oh, thank you very much. We know of the side of our ministry that we consider that the transition to a circular economy is a key issue from both economic and social aspects in Europe, but especially in our region. And we think that we must implement a model that takes into account the life cycle of products and minimizes the amount of waste that cannot be recycled. This not only increases the stability of supply, but also reduces the environmental impact of the products, and also creates new jobs, which is also important for us. So our ministry provided the legal framework for the transition to the circular economy in the spring of 2021, and the provisions of the European Union's directives were transposed into our legal system. In our approach, as a result of government measures, we want to introduce a waste management system in Hungary that sees waste as a raw material. And the priorities taken into account must be in line also with the waste hierarchy, which was already mentioned, as a principle in both the EU legislation and also in the Hungarian law. The current tasks of the Hungarian waste management sector are determined by the Climate and Nature Protection Action Plan, which I indicated in the slide, and the fulfillment of the obligations of the EU and national waste management legislation. And the goal of the action plan is to achieve a clean, waste-free environment as a national commitment. So we consider this also as a national commitment to this action plan and also to the fulfillment of the EU targets. With the measures in the field of waste management, our aim is to ensure the efficient use of resources and to increase the competitiveness of the waste management sector. It's important for us to create incentives for the participants in the sector, for the waste producers, participants in the waste management activities, the users of secondary raw materials from waste, and the consumers of as well. We elaborated some measures which I indicated on the slide. We set up a new waste management authority to ensure efficient and effective work of the public authorities and the coordinated action on priority issues. And the task of the new authority is to enforce the economic policy related to technological change and recycling related to products during subsidies. Based on the review of the waste management sector, because I have to mention that there was a review of our waste management sector in 2019, and also in the view of the challenges facing the waste management sector, we plan to introduce a concession model from the 1st of July next year. About the background of this decision and the statements of this review, I can speak later if someone asks. We are already in this preparational phase, so, and maybe our colleagues Anett can speak about it a bit more detailed, but also I can when somebody asks for it. Another measure is that in order to reduce the amount of waste and to increase the recovery rate, we will introduce a deposit return system for glass and plastic bottles, as well as metal cans from the 1st of January 2024. And this is also also serves to comply with the requirements of the SAP directive. We have some measures which are already implemented. From the 1st of July last year, the placing on the market of oxoplastic products and certain single-use plastic products are prohibited in Hungary, which is also set in the already mentioned Climate and Environmental Protection Action Plan as well. And we also set stricter administrative and criminal sanctions from the 1st of March last year in order to tackle and prevent illegal dumping. These measures were based on the experiences of the involved authorities. We worked on this together with the authorities. Next slide, please. Thank you. The Circular Economy Directive package imposes measures on the member states on waste prevention, reuse, preparation for reuse, recycling and recovery, and as well as precise target values. The impact of the domestic efforts, or our efforts, to increase waste recycling and the transposition of the package of directives mainly affect the management of municipal waste and packaging waste. This diagram on the slide shows the target set in the EU directives concerning the municipal waste and recycling and landfill, and the target rates for the total and detailed packaging waste. And there are also the present rates indicated with green color concerning the performance of Hungary. We can see, we can state that in Hungary, the proportion of municipal waste recovered in its material has slightly decreased, unfortunately, in the last years, and the proportion of the landfilled municipal waste has stagnated in the last years. And in order to reduce the amount of waste going to landfill and to increase the recycling rate, it is necessary for us to develop the separate collection system for municipal waste. That was also a reason for the concession system, concession model, for introducing the concession model next year. Hungary can use the derogation concerning the targets. So in our measures, we also have to consider that the energy recovery of residual waste that cannot be recovered in its material does not contribute to the material recovery target. And however, in the case of waste that is not recoverable in material, but is still valuable from an energy point of view, we think that treatment capacity is needed, and we have to plan to provide these capacities in the future. We can see in the slide some additional requirements, and I also indicated our main focus of our measures: the waste prevention, the separate collection, and the enhance of the reuse and recycling. We can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. With a little reference to the focus of the Waste Framework Directive review, I made a slide about our National Waste Prevention Program because I was at some meetings, and there was a question if which member state has a waste prevention program, and it came out that not every member state of the EU has a separated waste management, special waste management, waste prevention program. So in Hungary, it is part of the National Waste Management Plan, and the current strategic documents are valid for 2021 to 2027. And you can see on the slide the overall objective of the National Prevention Program, which introduce measures to promote the decoupling of resource use from the economic development, to reduce material use and waste generation, to contribute more efficient resource management, to increase the life cycle of products, promote solutions with the less possible environmental impact. And I also put up the main intervention areas as well, which are the food waste prevention, the reduction of construction demolition waste generation, the reuse, the greening of public procurement, and environmentally conscious production, sustainable corporate operation, and awareness raising. The extending the circular economy from the first recipients to the main economic actors will make also a contribution to achieving the climate neutrality plans by 2050. and to decoupling the economic growth from research use. So these are the overall objectives of our waste management programs. Based on the suggestions of the European Environmental Agency, we also gathered and set the necessary legal instruments and market and also the educational instruments in this program. And as a good example, I also indicated the establishing a food rescue system in 2021 last year as a good example for the food waste prevention measures in Hungary. We think that a careful overhaul of the legislation and the system is needed to ensure that food that are acceptable from a food safety point of view and are suitable for human consumption are no longer to be destroyed. And the main bottleneck in the prevention of food waste and the redistribution of rescuable food in Hungary is the capacity of the distribution network. So the results can be achieved by expanding this. In Hungary, a food rescue system has been established last year with the involvement of the food retailers. And we created the legal and financial basis for its operation, and for the management, the food rescue center has been established. Élelmiszermentő központ. The center carries out food distribution and redistribution, initially with a smaller capacity that will expand later with the time. And primarily, the reduction of food surpluses, the collection and distribution of food can be achieved through the logistical development of charitable organizations. And the central contracts with this organization, with the organizations on the beneficiary side of the food saving process. They have to register previously in this system, in this model. And these organizations can be state organizations, municipal organizations, or member organizations of the charitable council or other religious or private organizations. And these contracted partners deliver the food to the needy or other charities with a proper follow-up. And the center also provides and shares information between authorities and retailers. It has also a coordinative task as well. And the responsible and cooperative authority for this is the National Food Chain Safety Office, which got additional tasks concerning the food rescue program, monitoring task, and also the imposition of food rescue fines. Because when some retailer is registered in this program, so retailers have to have a food waste reduction plan, and they have to act according to it in this system. This model has been elaborated based on a French model, and its connection to the waste management. Since 2004, the waste management area has been collecting data related to waste, and there are also basic waste management data for certain stages of food supply chain, both for the primary production, processing, manufacturing, to the restaurants, catering, and households as well. And this database can or will form the food waste part of the country report scheduled to issue by the Commission in accordance with the Waste Framework Directive. It's also an ongoing task. And we have also several other waste prevention programs in other fields, such as the construction industry or just preventing illegal dumping. So I would like to mention this, and we are ready for the questions of the colleagues, even here and also later in writing. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Sylvia. I do have a couple of follow-up questions immediately to you as well, since you mentioned that we can ask about the concession more in detail. So I'm
not very much, but I try.
Well, within the boundaries of legal limits and good taste.
Yes.
Okay. So what was the model for that concession? Did you or contract? Did you have an international example, or this is very Hungary specific, Central European specific, that one of the biggest companies in the region, not only in Hungary, has an extra opportunity?
Yes, the need to change. It came based upon our experiences and perceivings. We look at the statistical data, and after the waste management directives came into force, we saw already that we need a revision of our system. So we, in 2019, we examined our system in this point of view, in this aspect. How can we manage? How can we build a more effective system? How can we fulfill the targets set in the directives? And we can state that in the recent years, the recycling rates were stagnating, and it showed that with unchanged conditions, the achievement of the increasingly ambitious waste management targets is not ensured anymore. And we also see that the reason for this was the fragmentation of the public service providers and the infrastructure as well, and the lack of effective coordination between the public providers and the other actors in the sector. And thus, we also saw that the public service operates with a loss, and this loss needed to be balanced by a central budget, which is not sustainable. It is not sustainable, not that sustainable as we expect from this system. And we also saw that the current model of the public waste management sector resulted to an uneven level and quality of public services in different areas, and the system has a short-term nature. Every planning, every reporting has to repeat it in every year, and it also makes it difficult to solve and correct problems for longer terms. So we examined also the EU legislation, and we were also discussed with EU actors also about this, that if the EU legislation environment makes it possible to create this kind of model. And we saw that a unified model can be more effective for this sector.
So you expect the improvement of all that you mentioned by a single central operator, financial, waste collection, management of economic circumstances, the evening of losses, and perhaps consumer information, consumer behavior. Do you expect that there's going to be a direct effect on consumer behavior, industrial and not industrial players? Or
we saw that we try to elaborate a model which makes all the actors interested in, all the industrial economical actors, and also we hope that also the consumer will see that when they can get a unified service on a certain good level, certain better level, that they will be also more interested to maintain this system.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, I would jump onto our last presenter, who is coming from the company that has been given the opportunity to improve all that's been going to waste. Well, not literally, but from a regulatory point of view. And that person is Ms. Anett, who is a senior expert for EU regulatory affairs at MOL Group Hungary. She's a public affairs professional with a throughout knowledge of business sustainability challenges and opportunities. She also has a quite deep knowledge of EU public affairs and strategic communication campaigns in the area of sustainability, circular economy, chemicals, and climate change. Ms. Tóth, not so long ago, has also spent a couple of years in Brussels, so she's not new to the environment. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to also thank you for the invitation to allow me to present the company perspective on behalf of MOL Group. So just a quick introduction about the company, but I think we've talked about that enough. So MOL Group is an integrated oil, gas, petrochemicals, and consumer retail company headquartered in Hungary. Two main areas of our operations are relevant for the circular economy area. One is the traditional downstream operations. We operate 3 refineries and 2 petrochemical plants, which makes us among the top 10 polymer producers in Europe and the biggest in Central Europe. And then secondly, as discussed, indeed, MOL was announced as a winner of the Hungarian state concession tender for the waste management of municipal solid waste in Hungary, which means that we will be responsible for the collection of close to 5 million tons of municipal solid waste, and also for ensuring its treatment and related investments. So just very quickly about MOL Group and our strategy. Our strategy is really to change the linear way of production of the operations that we've done traditionally, where traditionally the resources are extracted, processed, and then after usually one single use by consumers, discarded. Our strategy's objective is to change this and to make our operations more circular by integrated bio and waste-based streams into the production of fuels, of chemicals, and of plastics. So it is in line with this strategy that we applied for the Hungarian concession tender that, as we said, covers municipal waste management services for a time period of 35 years, starting on in July 2023, as mentioned. As mentioned, the amount of waste that we will be responsible for is around 4.7 million tons. And this is mostly municipal solid waste collected from public service and institutional activities. And it is indeed from the reception of waste to their handover for treatment. This involves basically the supply of around 4.5 million households and 1.8 million economic organizations. And it also includes the introduction of extended producer responsibility and the deposit return scheme system. So why is this relevant from a Waste Framework Directive perspective? We've also mentioned this, but I have a bit of a different chart on this. But indeed, the reorganization happened because of the strict targets set in the current Waste Framework Directive. And happy to hear that Mr. Ciobanu-Dordea thinks that it is indeed still a good basis and we can have some regulatory certainty on these targets going ahead. So as you can see, not only Hungary, but the entire Central and Eastern European region is far behind reaching these targets, especially in terms of reducing landfilling to 10% by 2035. But also achieving the recycling target of 65% will be quite difficult. And even when those two targets are achieved, the remaining 25% of the waste will still have to be treated in other facilities. And as Mrs. Santos, she mentioned, the region is quite underdeveloped in waste to energy. So also those capacities will need to be improved in Hungary and also in the region. So as part of MOL Group's contractual obligations, as part of the concession tender, we are obligated to achieve these targets. And what we will do in order to do that is, and this is what also our contract obliges us to, is to make waste collection and transportation tasks more efficient, including infrastructure development and optimization. As I mentioned, to introduce the EPR and DRS schemes. We will be also the ones introducing the separate collection of the new waste streams that are an obligation as part of the Waste Framework Directive. So the new waste streams of textile waste, bio waste streams, and used cooking oil. And we will be the ones also responsible for building that waste to energy capacity. To do all of this, we have committed that within the first 10 years of the concession tender, we will spend at least 185 billion Hungarian forints, so meaning around 0.4 billion euros on these activities. So this is kind of, what our contractual obligations are, and this is really in the context of the current Waste Framework Directive. Now, to change a bit to this revision of the Waste Framework Directive, I have 3 areas that I wanted to highlight in terms of where we think it could be improved. And that's, of course, based on what we saw from the public consultation and those areas that were listed there. So the first one is on waste generation reduction. We really believe that, some targeted changes in the directive could be useful in this area. Basically, in line with the waste hierarchy, we do support that waste generation reduction and reuse has to be improved. But we also do think that a better methodology and better data is really needed to identify the key sources of waste generation. So we don't think that, for example, an EU-wide target on per capita levels of waste would be needed. As you can see, countries vary widely in terms of their per capita waste generation numbers. So we think it should be really a targeted approach rather than an EU-wide approach. And as also there has been some discussions, we really think that it's the sectoral legislation or even these product-specific, for example, eco-design regulations that are more useful to target the waste generation reduction rather than doing overarching targets in an environment where the actors and where member states are operating or are less or more efficient. Then in terms of reuse, we also think that some guidance and some data is missing. Sometimes even in the data, probably the preparation for reuse phase is not really clear when this is reported. So some improvements on the reporting side of reuse could be useful, because then this could then also help in increasing those numbers. One thing that we like to highlight is that we very much support a life cycle approach to reuse. So we really need to see if the environmental benefits of reuse are outweighing the potential environmental costs, such as related to water or energy use or the emission of chemicals into the environment. So we very much support reuse, but we think the LCA approach and also maybe some sectoral focus, like for packaging, would be very much welcome rather than an overarching scheme. Second area that I will quickly highlight is in terms of recycling, and it is in terms of how to then better achieve those targets that I've been talking about. We think that also the directive could have some potentials to improve the quality of recycling, for example. So of course, as a concessionaire, we will be responsible for all waste streams and for all of those to preferably be transferred for recycling. But I have a specific example of plastics here. It's also because of our traditional petrochemicals focus. So for example, for plastics, the current recycling as we know it, which is mechanical recycling, it's very important to improve that further, because currently it does have some limitations. So it is only suitable for very well sorted waste, and also the quality of plastics in mechanical recycling downgrades after a time. So we are also a small group, for example, looking into other technologies that we think would be promoted by the Waste Framework Directive, such as chemical recycling, which could address some of these limitations by being able to address a wider range of plastics that are today sent to landfill or incinerated because they are a bit contaminated, for example, and they can also result in better quality recyclates at the end of the day. So we've been happy to see that there have been some confirmations from the Commission that chemical recycling can also contribute to the recycling targets for the percentage that it produces materials or substances. But we still see that some regulatory certainty would be needed in terms of how to calculate that contribution to the recycling targets, to the recycled content targets, and also maybe some guidance on how the life cycle emissions of these technologies should be measured and how these should be really, taken on by companies who are considering really high risk investments. There is this regulatory certainty that would be needed. And then finally, in terms of improving separate collection, this has also been mentioned a couple of times that the improvement of separate collection is important because it can increase the recycling rate and also it can improve the quality, for example, of mechanical recycling. So we really believe that this is a key area of improvement in Hungary. And this is why also as our concessional tasks, what I mentioned that we committed to this initial 10-year investment of 185 billion forints, we will spend more than 80% of that investment on actually improving the separate collection and sorting system in Hungary. This includes new collection containers and the related identification system. This includes new waste collection vehicles, waste yards, and sorting facilities as well. And so we are really planning heavy investment in this area. But beyond that investment, we do think that consumer education is key. And we've heard some things about consumer involvement before. So really you see some ideas for this on the slide, but we think that, well, first of all, I want to say that this is not part of our contractual obligation, but it is really from the ministry an indirect expectation from MOL that we do promote the improvement of consumer attitude in this area. And we are planning to do that because we really think that, providing information on how actually the waste management system works, or labeling products and containers, or increasing convenience for consumers to participate in the system is really important, as well as, for example, some financial incentives. So for example, pay-as-you-throw schemes that can really incentivize their behavior change. So these are some of the thoughts on the revision and also our existing task. Happy to answer any questions related to this.
Thank you very much. That was quite informative. Of course, I would have many questions. Let's just start with one instant follow-up question. Are you planning the introduction of any artificial intelligence AI solutions when it comes to, let's say, talking or speaking garbage cans that would send you a signal, in order to let you know wherever you need to route your vehicles, saying that, okay, I'm 3/4 full, you can reroute your vehicles. I mean, it's a known example, right? I don't think it's applied in Hungary, but it significantly saves environmental costs, transportation-related emissions, and so on and so forth. Plus, it helps you better plan. Anything that would come in that respect?
Yes, so I'm mostly, working on the regulatory side of things, but I can give you a bit of a response, maybe not so much going into the technology of this. But as I mentioned, of the investments, around 80% we will spend on separate collection. The remaining 10 to 20% includes, for example, IT investments. So we very much think that the tracking of waste flows and also of some IT solutions will be very important. So we are looking into this area. As you might know, since we recently signed the concession tender, we are now in the process of, reaching out to our partners who will be working with us, for example, also for setting up the deposit return system. And here, part of, the evaluation of of the companies and technologies we want to work with is how we can have, smart solutions and better solutions to improve the system. Also, in terms of separate collection, when I say we want to make waste collection more efficient, I indeed also mean that we will, we are looking at optimal fleet utilization of the vehicles, or really route planning predetermined by each region, or really looking at, measuring and readjusting our activity based on demand.
It would be lovely to see those coming into practice.
Work in progress.
Quite soon. And also you mentioned that you want to improve the attitude of consumers, but why not the behaviors? I'm always afraid when I hear targeting regulatory or market-based mechanisms at attitude, that we run into something that is known, for example, in privacy as a privacy paradox. So the attitude does not respond to the actual behavior, does not correspond to the actual behavior. And people say that, of course, I do everything in order to, in this case, not to throw away garbage, but at the end they don't do that. So how do you plan to bridge that gap? Because what comes out of the Századvég study as well is that the actual behavior is very different from what people or even literature say about culture or social aspects of approach to certain behavior itself, right?
Maybe this differentiation in wording was not on purpose. So I think I also rather meant consumer behavior. And this is why I meant, providing information to them, maybe certain nudging with some kind of, signs on the waste bins and on products. And, also the financial incentives that I mentioned. But I think maybe the word consumer attitude, I wasn't going into the philosophical meaning of this, and I was just meaning
it's an actual meaning. Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much. Do you know any other member states in the European Union while a single service provider is responsible for municipal waste collection? Just out of interest.
I'm not really aware of the European practice, but I think it's probably not. Like, I think usually there are more actors that are responsible. As shown in the numbers, we have a very specific case where something very efficient and centralized needed to be introduced. So this is why it happened.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We have arrived at the end of our planned time, but I would still like to ask if you can hang on a little bit longer. One question, very quick question to each of the participants, and I would start with Aurel from the European Commission. So we have long talked about, Anett, as the last participant as well, mentioned the extended producer responsibility. And you mentioned also in your presentation as well. So how would you fit the sectoral extended producer responsibilities for WE, packaging, batteries, end-of-life vehicles with the plans that the Waste Framework Directive sort of upgrade or recast is doing? How does that fit? Because there are a lot of EPRs right now that are coming into play in the sectoral rules. But is this going to be more of a horizontal approach that WFD is doing, or what's the plan?
So the plan is that there are certain general rules on EPR, extended producer responsibility schemes in the Waste Framework Directive. We may mandate some sector specific, like for textiles, when we revise this directive, but it is not excluded, and actually it is already the case that sectoral instruments on packaging, for instance, will bring more specific rules, and which actually will be indicators of performance or requirements for performance, which would be specific to a category of products or another, or for batteries, or for, I don't know, vehicles, because we may well bring forward next spring also a legislative proposal which could be quite comprehensive about the design, about cars, about vehicles, from the design to the end of life. And there we will also include some product-specific EPR rules, but they will all have to fit with the general framework which is provided by the Waste Framework Directive. This is the answer which I can provide now, a little bit generic.
Yeah, no, when it comes to the EPR, another concept that Anett mentioned as well, the life cycle assessment, right? So life cycle assessment, when we talk about life cycle assessment, if I imagine a building, we talk about life cycle assessment of construction products. It's an ongoing initiative, right? It's on the legislative train. Life cycle assessment of construction products, life cycle assessment of buildings, EPBD. Again, it's in the process. Then the waste of construction waste, right? So that's life cycle assessment as well. So the question that comes to my mind, so aren't these different life cycle approaches a little bit overlap, right? Laughing at when it comes to, so at which stage do I assess the life cycle of each product, right? At the construction phase, at the production phase, sorry, at the construction phase, at the building phase, or at the demolition phase in this case. But I just took an example, yeah? And Anett mentioned, I think, another life cycle approach, another sector, petrochemicals maybe.
Listen, I am no expert on this, and I would need to look more into details of this, but I would note for the moment that in the area of waste management, we don't have yet enshrined in the legal instruments a life cycle approach, but we are following it. I mean, it informs our impact assessments for the revision of the different legal instruments. We are based on a life cycle approach when we speak and when we address the problem of the product's environmental footprint and others. I think the life cycle approach gives us a measurement about the performance and sustainability of different products and services, and the estimation of the life cycle performance in terms of carbon footprint, in terms of water consumption, in terms of waste generation, recyclability, etc., needs to inform the policy making, and I would say also the activity of the producers and their innovation, in order to make their, so it's a sort of barometer of the sustainability, about the sustainability of a product or of a certain economic sector. And both policymakers and the producers, the industry, need to inform their regulatory activities or their design, the design of their industrial production. They need to take into account the life cycle approach. If we are driven by a significant concern, and for the time being we are driven all in Europe by this significant concern, which I think is here to last, which is the need to reduce the carbon emissions of our production, consumption, the need to reduce the environmental footprint, the material consumption, the water consumption, the air pollution of our activities, of our products, of our services. So if we believe, and everybody, I mean, it is a prevailing narrative, political and societal level, about sustainability and about tackling climate change and environmental production and the decline of biodiversity, then the life cycle approach is, let's say, a more quantifiable way, a more quantifiable guide, a more concrete guide for making true our politically, our declamatory, stated goals.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. That was very kind of you. I know it's. I mean, you mentioned it's not your particular areas of expertise, but I just wanted to know about the coherence which you enlightened me about. So, thank you very much for that. I'm turning to Ms. Szentesi from the government, right? So is there anything that with the last question really, is there anything that you would expect that in the coming years Hungary could excel, could stand out when it comes to implementation of the existing or the new rules under the Waste Framework Directive? Are we in the country, are we set to excel at something when it comes to waste collection?
That's a good question. Can you a bit more elaborate this question?
Well, from a regulatory, from a regulatory perspective, right? Because obviously I'm not asking for a general view here. So under which sort of sectoral legislation are we best set to stand out when it comes to implementing the Waste Framework Directive? So are we, perhaps it's municipal waste management because we have the new concession right now, or what do you think? Is there anything else, or reduction of waste in general?
I think we are okay. I think we are prepared well enough in contraction when I compare it with the regional with other regional countries in our area. With our legislation, I think it's well prepared and well elaborated. We have, for example, of our EPR schemes are also, they have a past with this environmental protection fee system, which we have already. So we have already an existing system as part of an EPR scheme, and we implemented the regulation in time. So on the legislatory side, I think we are in a relevant normal position.
Let's see what the Commission
implementation
says
is another question.
Yes. Let's see what they will say in the reports. I'm really looking forward to seeing that.
Yes, it is our performance who comes to question.
Yeah. Anett, you wanted to...
If I may add something.
Yes,
so actually, for example, in terms of the textile EPR, we will be ahead of most of the member states because we will also introduce the textile EPR as of next year. And this is something that is still only coming in the Waste Framework Directive. So it will be much later when it becomes an obligation for the other member states to have a textile EPR, while us in Hungary will be already implementing that way before. So that can be, for example.
Yes, okay, that's a good point. László, last question to you. I've seen in the questions and then in the answers that the study that you talked about did not compare municipal level consumers and NOS level consumers. Do you think that would bring a different result? So maybe within municipalities there would be a difference because of urban lifestyle versus suburban or country lifestyle. Would that result in different waste collection attitude?
Maybe we were curious about it, but we did not measure the differences in municipality level, as I wrote it to an participant. We only focusing on regional aspects, but we see that, and it was quite interesting, and I didn't mention it in my presentation. We measure the regions which had a good quality of beans, waste beans, and waste coverage points, but we didn't see any correlation between the proportion of beans or waste collection points and the actual behavior. So it was quite interesting, and we think that there is a difference between the urbanized environment and the rural environment, because in a rural environment, maybe we can find other, sometimes alternative waste generation or waste reuse opportunities. But in an urban environment, we are more tight, and we don't have enough opportunity to reuse our waste, or we collect the waste separately, or and so on. But in the big cities, there are a lot of opportunity. We see that, but there are some differences. But the actual behavior is arisen from attitude sometimes. So if there is a lack of information and knowledge, or maybe infrastructural side, the attitude can boost the actual behavior at the end.
All right. I mean, of course, this could be going on for hours, but I can see that the participants have started to thank us in a subtle way for the webinar, and the number has decreased. So thank you very much, and apologize if we have run a little bit longer with the webinar, but it was extremely interesting, and I also hope that this is only the very beginning of discussing waste, and we can go waste management policies. We can go more into detail, and perhaps more specific with more specific recommendations to one another of the participants, because you know, generating less waste, as Aurel mentioned, as arriving in a future where there's less carbon footprint is a common goal of everyone. And if somebody decides not to participate, it has a very negative external effect on everyone else who is in that society. So it's a common goal. It's a common goal for everyone. I thank you very much for your participation. I believe it was a very good conversation, and should anyone have questions, participants, panelists, please do send it to Bente or the organizers. We will distribute, and we will make this public, hopefully within a very short amount of time. So once again, thank you very much. I really appreciate your contributions, and looking forward to seeing you in the future at different events. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for the invitation. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.